And for anyone out there prepping for the IELTS, well, you know, prepositions are kind of a big deal, right?
They can be. Yeah, they can make or break your score sometimes, those little words.
Exactly. And, we got some great feedback from a listener who pointed us to this Essential Prepositions blog. Really good stuff. So we're going to kind of dig into that today, see what we can pull out for those of you studying for the test.
Yeah, it's a fantastic resource. It covers so much ground.
It does. And I think what's cool is it starts with the basics, right? Like we all know about prepositions of place and time and direction and on that, all that.
It's a foundation.
Yeah, but then it goes beyond that into some really fascinating stuff like how prepositions are used differently in speaking versus writing.
And then there's the whole world of phrasal verbs. Oh my goodness.
Don't even get me started on those. But yeah, the blog has some great tips for tackling those too, especially for the listening test.
Yeah, they can be tricky in the listening section for sure.
Okay, so let's start with those basics then. Like the blog emphasizes that even though you might know what a preposition is, you got to be super precise with them for the IELTS.
Exactly. It's not just about knowing the general meaning. It's about using the right preposition in the right context. And that shows a higher level of English.
Yeah, like give me an example.
Sure. So imagine you're in the speaking test and you're talking about where you live and you say, I live at a vibrant city.
At a vibrant city.
It sounds a little off, right? It should be, I live in a vibrant city.
Ah, okay. In a vibrant city, that makes a difference.
It does. Those little details matter.
So using the correct preposition can really make your English sound more natural, more sophisticated.
Absolutely. And that's what the examiners are listening for.
The blog also mentions how important prepositions are for those map tasks in the listening section.
Oh, those can be tough.
Right, because if the speaker says, turn left at the crossroads, you need to know that's different from turn left after the crossroads.
Yeah, one little word can send you in the wrong direction, literally.
And then you miss the next few instructions and you're totally lost.
Exactly. So paying attention to those prepositions of place is crucial for those map tasks.
Okay, good point, good point.
Yeah.
Now, beyond those basic prepositions, the blog gets into some really interesting stuff, like those constructions with adjective plus preposition plus the ing form of a verb.
Oh, yeah, those are good ones.
Right, like I'm interested in learning new languages, or she's passionate about playing the guitar.
Those are great for the speaking test because they let you express your opinions and feelings in a more sophisticated way.
Yeah, you sound more fluent, more natural. Yeah. And the blog even gives a list of common adjective plus preposition combinations that you can learn.
Oh, that's handy.
Right, like a shortcut to sounding more impressive.
Love those shortcuts.
Me too, me too. All right, but we can't talk about prepositions without addressing the elephant in the room.
You mean phrasal verbs?
Ugh, yes. Those can be a real pain, especially for IELTS prep.
I know what you mean, but they're important.
They're everywhere in English. And the blog makes this distinction between verb plus preposition, where the meaning stays kind of consistent.
Right, like agree with agree on.
Exactly. And then you've got those crazy phrasal verbs where the meaning changes completely.
Like come across, run into so many possibilities.
And the blog says those phrasal verbs are essential for sounding natural in the speaking test and for informal writing.
You got to know your phrasal verbs.
But how do you even begin to learn them? There are thousands of them?
I know it can be overwhelming, but the blog suggests learning them in context rather than just memorizing lists.
Okay, in context. So reading articles, listening to podcasts, things like that.
Exactly. You see how they're used naturally and you start to pick them up.
So it's more about absorbing them organically than forcing yourself to memorize them.
Exactly. Make it a natural part of your language learning.
And I think what's really cool is the blog points out this trick that the listening test often uses.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
They use a phrasal verb in the audio, but then in the question, they use a more formal equivalent.
Ooh, sneaky.
Right, so you have to be able to connect those two things in your mind.
That's a good tip. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, the blog gives the example of workout being used in the audio, but the question asks about calculations.
Ah, so you have to understand that workout in that context means to calculate something.
Exactly. So if you don't know that phrasal verb, you might miss the question, even though you understood the audio.
That's a great point. It highlights why understanding phrasal verbs is so crucial for the listening test.
And I love how they emphasize learning them in context.
Yeah.
Not just memorizing lists of prepositions.
Right. Seeing them in action in real sentences and phrases makes such a difference.
Let's be real. Phrasal verbs can be a major stumbling block for a lot of IELTS test takers.
I get it. There are so many of them.
It can feel overwhelming. Where do you even start?
Right. But the blog makes this really important point. You don't need to know every single phrasal verb in the English language.
Thank goodness for that.
Exactly what you do need to know are the ones that are most commonly used in the IELTS context.
So how can our listener prepare for that kind of thing?
Well, one way is to pay close attention to the language used in IELTS practice materials.
Okay, so like noticing the phrasal verbs that come up in the listening audios.
Exactly, and then thinking about the different ways those phrasal verbs could be paraphrased using more formal language.
So it's like a mental exercise, building those connections between informal and formal vocabulary.
Precisely, and the more you do it, the easier it becomes to recognize those patterns in the listening test.
All right, now let's shift gears a bit and talk about those often overlooked but incredibly important prepositional phrases.
Ah, yes. Those are essential for creating natural-sounding English.
They're like the little connectors that make everything flow smoothly.
And the blog breaks them down into two main categories, everyday expressions and formal expressions.
Okay, so everyday expressions would be things like at home, by bus, on vacation.
Exactly. And then formal expressions would be phrases like, in addition, on the other hand, in conclusion.
And the blog suggests that we should be actively noticing these phrases in the English we encounter every day.
Absolutely. Pay attention to how prepositions are used in books, articles, movies, TV shows, conversations.
So it's like training your ear to pick up on those patterns.
Exactly. And then consciously trying to incorporate those phrases into your own speaking and writing.
So it's not just about passive recognition, it's about active use.
Yes. The more you use them, the more natural they will become.
And the more confident you'll feel using them in the IELTS.
Okay, so we've talked about learning prepositions in context, chunking those phrases together.
And now I want to take that idea one step further and apply it to all our IELTS vocabulary learning. So instead of just memorizing lists of words,
We should be focusing on how those words are used in real-life situations.
right, seeing those words in action, hearing them spoken, and then trying to use them ourselves. Like we talked about those phrasal verbs and prepositional phrases.
Right, those chunks of language that can really elevate your IELTS performance.
So what's the best way for our listener to start incorporating those chunks into their prep?
Well, one really effective strategy is to pay close attention to the language used in IELTS practice materials.
Okay, so like the reading passages, the listening audios, the speaking prompts.
Exactly. Notice how prepositions are used in those contexts. Highlight those common chunks. Write them down and try to use them yourself.
And the blog also emphasizes that this process doesn't have to be boring,
Not at all. In fact, it can be quite fun.
right? Because you can learn these chunks through exposure to all sorts of interesting English materials.
Exactly. Movies, TV shows, podcasts, books, articles, anything that interests you.
And as you're enjoying those things, just pay attention to how prepositions are being used.
Notice those phrasal verbs, those prepositional phrases, and try to figure out what they mean in those specific contexts. And over time, you'll start to see those patterns everywhere.
And you'll find yourself using them more and more naturally in your own speaking and writing.
Exactly. It's all about building that fluency and confidence.
So to sum it all up, those little prepositions, they might seem insignificant, but they're actually really powerful.
They really are. They shape the way we communicate, and they can make a huge difference in how fluent and sophisticated we sound.
And by focusing on mastering those prepositions, especially those tricky phrasal verbs and those habitual prepositional phrases, you're taking your English to the next level. And with that, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into the world of prepositions for IELTS success.
We've covered a lot of ground today.
We have. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time for another exciting exploration of the English language.
Until then, happy learning, everyone.